The classroom buzzed with the usual chaos of a Monday morning. Chairs scraped against the tiled floor as students hurried to find their seats. Backpacks were unzipped, notebooks flipped open, and whispers filled the air like static. In the corner of the room, one boy sat quietly, his dark curls spilling over his forehead as he doodled in the margins of his notebook. He wasn't a troublemaker, nor was he particularly talkative. He liked to keep to himself, and most of the time, the teacher barely noticed him. But today, everything would change in ways no one could have anticipated. The teacher, Ms. Harper, walked into the room holding a stack of papers. She was known for being strict, with a no-nonsense attitude that kept most students in line. Her sharp gaze swept across the room as she placed the papers on her desk. "All right, everyone," she said briskly. "Settle down. We've got a lot to cover today, and I'm not in the mood for distractions." The students groaned softly but complied, shifting in their seats and quieting down. Ms. Harper had a way of commanding authority without raising her voice. To her, discipline was everything. She believed that every rule mattered, no matter how small. But sometimes her desire for order made her act before thinking. And today was one of those days. As the lesson began, Ms. Harper's attention was drawn to the boy in the corner. His curls, thick and unruly, fell over his eyes, and she noticed he kept brushing them back as he wrote. To her, it was distracting, not just for him, but for the rest of the class. She paused mid-sentence, narrowing her eyes. "You," she called out, pointing a finger in his direction. "What's with your hair? You can't even see what you're writing." The boy froze, startled by the sudden attention. The class turned to look at him, some students snickering under their breath. He shrank in his seat, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. I can see fine, Ma'am," he stammered softly. Ms. Harper wasn't convinced. To her, this wasn't just about his hair. It was about discipline. If she let one student get away with breaking the rules, others might follow. "It's against school policy to have your hair covering your eyes," she said firmly. "Fix it now, or I'll fix it for you." The boy hesitated, his hands twitching nervously. He didn't want to cause trouble, but he also didn't want to cut or tie up his hair. It was his favorite part of himself. His father had always told him it made him unique. What Ms. Harper didn't know, what none of the students knew, was that his father wasn't just anyone. He was the principal of the school, a man known for his fairness and understanding. But the boy didn't want to draw attention to that. He wanted to be treated like everyone else. Seeing his reluctance, Ms. Harper's patience wore thin. She marched to the supply cabinet, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The students watched in stunned silence as she rummaged through the shelves before pulling out a bottle of glue. Turning back to the boy, she held it up for everyone to see. "If you won't fix it, I will," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. "Ma'am, you can't." Before he could finish, she walked over to him, her expression unyielding. The rest of the class sat frozen, unsure whether to laugh or protest. One student whispered, "She wouldn't really do it, would she?" But deep down, they all knew Miss Harper didn't make empty threats. Without another word, she squeezed a line of glue onto her fingers and pressed them into the boy's hair, pushing the curls back out of his face. He flinched, but he didn't dare move. The sticky substance clung to his strands, matting them together in an awkward shape. When she stepped back, she seemed satisfied. "There," she said, as if she'd solved a great problem. "Now you can see your work." The boy sat in stunned silence, his face burning with humiliation. His classmates stared at him, their expressions ranging from pity to shock. No one dared say a word, not even the usual class clown. The air was thick with tension, and Ms. Harper returned to the front of the room as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, something that couldn't be undone. For the rest of the lesson, the boy barely lifted his head. He avoided eye contact with everyone, focusing instead on the clock as he counted down the minutes until class was over. When the bell finally rang, he bolted out of the room, clutching his backpack tightly to his chest. The glue in his hair felt heavy, a physical reminder of his humiliation. He kept his head down as he navigated the crowded hallways, desperate to make it to the bathroom where he could wash it out. But as he reached the door, he heard a voice behind him. "Hey, wait up." It was one of his classmates, a girl who had been sitting 2 rows behind him. She looked at him with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Are you okay?" That was intense. He nodded quickly, not trusting himself to speak. He didn't want to cry, especially not in front of anyone. She hesitated, then said, "You should tell someone." That wasn't right, what she did. You know that, right? He nodded again, but he didn't plan on telling anyone. He just wanted to forget it had ever happened. What he didn't know was that he wouldn't have to say anything. The story of Miss Harper's actions was already spreading like wildfire through the school. By lunchtime, nearly every student had heard about the teacher who had glued a boy's hair in front of the entire class. Whispers filled the cafeteria, and even some of the staff were talking about it in hushed tones. Eventually, the story reached the ears of the principal. Sitting in his office, he listened as one of the secretaries relayed the tale, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Do you think it's true?" she asked. The principal didn't respond immediately. He felt a sinking feeling in his chest as he pieced everything together. He knew his son well enough to recognize the boy in the story. His quiet nature, his curly hair, it all fit. But the idea that one of his teachers could humiliate his child in such a way was almost too much to process. He stood abruptly, his jaw set in determination. "I'll handle it," he said, his voice low but firm. As he made his way to Miss Harper's classroom, a storm of emotions churned inside him: anger, disbelief, and a deep sadness for his son. He thought about how much his boy had been through, how hard he worked to fit in without using his father's position as a shield. And now this. When he reached the door, he paused for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady himself. Then, with a quiet but deliberate knock, he stepped inside. Miss Harper looked up from her desk, startled by the unexpected visitor. "Oh, Principal," she said, standing quickly. "What brings you here?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes scanned the room, taking in the familiar details: the rows of desks, the neatly stacked textbooks, the glue bottle sitting conspicuously on the edge of her desk. His gaze lingered there for a moment before finally settling on her. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but laced with an unmistakable edge. Miss Harper's smile faltered. She could sense that this wasn't a casual visit, and a knot of unease began to form in her stomach. "Of course," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Is everything all right?" He didn't sit down. Instead, he walked over to the desk and picked up the bottle of glue, holding it up for her to see. "I think you know why I'm here," he said. Her face paled, and for the first time, she seemed at a loss for words. I was just trying to enforce the rules," she stammered. "By humiliating a student." His voice was still calm, but the intensity behind it was impossible to ignore. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The classroom fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. And for the first time, Miss Harper realized just how much trouble she was in. Miss Harper swallowed hard, her usually confident demeanor beginning to crack. She was known for her strictness, but she had never been called out like this before, especially not by the principal himself. Her eyes flicked to the glue bottle in his hand. And for a moment, she felt the weight of her actions pressing down on her. "I didn't mean to hurt him," she said quietly, her voice almost trembling. I thought I was teaching him a lesson." The principal's grip on the glue bottle tightened, but he placed it back on the desk, his movements deliberate. He took a step closer, his towering presence making the room feel smaller. "A lesson in what?" "Embarrassment. Public humiliation. You're a teacher, Miss Harper. You're supposed to guide and protect these kids, not tear them down." His words hit her like a wave, and she looked away, unable to meet his piercing gaze. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time, She realized how deeply she had crossed a line, but her pride wouldn't let her fully admit it, not yet. The principal let the silence linger, his steady, measured breathing the only sound in the room. He wasn't one to yell or make a scene, but his presence alone demanded respect. After a long moment he spoke again, his tone quieter, but no less firm. "Do you even know who that boy is?" Ms. Harper blinked, confused by the question. "He's just one of my students," she said cautiously. I don't even know his name." The principal's jaw tightened. "His name is Ethan, and he's my son." Ms. Harper's heart sank. The air seemed to leave the room, and her knees felt weak. She gripped the edge of her desk to steady herself, her mind racing. She had never connected the boy in the corner with the principal. He had always kept a low profile, never drawing attention to himself. And now, she realized, she had made the biggest mistake of her career. I didn't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "If I had known." The principal cut her off with a sharp glance. "If you had known." "What?" "That he's my son. Would you have treated him differently?" "Because that's not the point, Miss Harper. You shouldn't have done this to any child. Not my son, not anyone." Miss Harper felt her face flush with shame. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she had only meant to enforce the rules, but deep down, she knew there was no justification. What she had done was wrong, plain and simple. Meanwhile, Ethan sat alone in the school library, his head resting on his folded arms. The librarian had given him a concerned look when he walked in, but she didn't ask any questions. Ethan was grateful for that. He didn't want to talk to anyone. Not about what had happened, not about how he felt, not about anything. He ran his fingers through his hair, wincing as they snagged on the dried glue. The humiliation of it all made his chest ache. He kept replaying the moment in his head, the way Ms. Harper had marched over to him, the way the class had stared, the way he had felt so small and powerless. He hated it. Ethan thought about his dad, about how proud he always seemed when talking about the school. His dad believed in fairness and second chances, but would he be disappointed in Ethan for not standing up for himself? Would he think Ethan was weak? He sighed, closing his eyes and willing the tears to stay hidden. He didn't want to cry. Not here. Not now. Back in the classroom, the principal straightened, his expression unreadable. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice steady but cold. "You're going to write a formal apology to Ethan, and you're going to have a meeting with me and his mother to explain your actions." Ms. Harper nodded quickly, her mind already spinning with what she would say. She knew she couldn't refuse, but the thought of facing the boy's parents made her stomach twist with anxiety. The principal took a step back, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And for the record, Ms. Harper, this isn't over. I'll be reviewing this incident carefully, and there will be consequences." With that, he turned on his heel and left the room, leaving Ms. Harper standing in stunned silence. The classroom felt colder now, emptier, as if his presence had been the only thing holding the space together. She sank into her chair, running a hand through her hair as she tried to process what had just happened. In the hours that followed, the story continued to spread. Students whispered about it in the hallways, their voices hushed but filled with excitement. Some exaggerated the details, saying Miss Harper had used an entire bottle of glue, while others claimed the principal had fired her on the spot. The truth, as always, got lost in the shuffle, but one thing was clear: everyone was talking about it. Ethan avoided the cafeteria at lunch, choosing instead to sit outside on the far edge of the school grounds. He picked at his sandwich, not really hungry but knowing he should eat something. The sun felt warm on his skin, but it didn't do much to lift his mood. As he sat there, lost in thought, he heard footsteps approaching. He looked up to see the same girl from earlier, the one who had followed him to the bathroom. She had a sympathetic smile on her face as she sat down beside him, uninvited but not unwelcome. "Hey," she said softly. "How are you holding up?" Ethan shrugged, not trusting himself to speak. He didn't want to break down in front of her. She offered him a small, wrapped candy from her pocket. "Here," she said. "My mom says chocolate fixes everything." Ethan managed a weak smile, taking the candy and unwrapping it slowly. "Thanks," he murmured. The girl hesitated, then said, "I think what she did was awful, and I think you're really brave for sitting through it without saying anything." Ethan glanced at her, surprised. "Brave?" he echoed. "I didn't do anything." "You didn't make a scene," she said. "You didn't yell or fight back. That takes strength, too. It's not easy to just take it." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure if he agreed, but her words made him feel a little less alone. As the day went on, Ethan tried to keep a low profile, but it was impossible. To avoid the stares and whispers, some students looked at him with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with admiration. He didn't want any of it. He just wanted to go home and pretend this day had never happened. When the final bell rang, Ethan walked to his dad's office, his heart heavy with dread. He knew his dad would want to talk about what had happened, and he wasn't sure he was ready for that conversation. The principal looked up as Ethan entered, his expression softening when he saw his son. "Hey, bud," he said gently. "How was the rest of your day?" Ethan shrugged, dropping his backpack on the floor. "Fine," he mumbled. His dad studied him for a moment, then stood and walked over, crouching down so they were eye level. "Ethan," he said quietly, "I'm so sorry this happened to you. I've already spoken to Miss Harper, and there's going to be a meeting about it. But I need to know how you're feeling. Are you okay?" Ethan hesitated, his throat tightening. He wanted to say he was fine, that it didn't matter, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he shook his head, his eyes filling with tears. His dad pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't have to be okay right now. We'll get through this together." For the first time all day, Ethan felt a little bit of the weight lift from his shoulders. His dad's steady presence made him feel safe, like maybe everything would be all right in the end. But deep down, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. That evening, Ethan sat quietly at the dinner table, his plate barely touched. His mom and dad exchanged worried glances, each waiting for the other to say something. The tension in the room was thick, and even Ethan's little sister, who was usually full of chatter, stayed silent, sensing the mood. Finally, Ethan's mom broke the silence. "Ethan," she said gently, "we know today was hard for you. Your dad told me what happened, and I want you to know we're here for you. But I also want to hear how you feel about all this. You can talk to us." Ethan stared down at his plate, his appetite long gone. It was embarrassing. He admitted in a small voice, "Everyone was staring at me, laughing at me. I wanted to disappear." His mom reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "What she did was wrong, Ethan. Nobody should ever treat you, or anyone, like that. Your dad and I are going to make sure this doesn't happen again." Ethan looked up at his dad, who nodded firmly. "Tomorrow, we're having a meeting with Miss Harper," his dad said. "Your mom and I will both be there, and she's going to explain herself. This isn't just about you, Ethan. It's about making sure no other kid has to go through what you did today." Ethan wanted to believe his parents, but a part of him still felt small and powerless. "What if she doesn't care?" he asked. "What if she just keeps doing stuff like this to other kids?" His dad's expression softened, but his voice remained steady. "Then we'll make sure she doesn't. You have my word on that." The next morning, Ethan woke up with a knot in his stomach. He didn't want to go to school, didn't want to face his classmates, and definitely didn't want to be part of the meeting with Miss Harper. But he knew he couldn't avoid it forever. As he walked into the school with his parents, he felt every pair of eyes on him. The whispers had started again, louder now that the principal and his wife were walking alongside him. Ethan kept his head down, wishing he could just blend into the walls. The meeting was scheduled for first period, And by the time they reached his dad's office, Ethan's heart was racing. Inside, Ms. Harper was already waiting, sitting stiffly in one of the chairs. She looked up as they entered, her expression unreadable. "Good morning," Ethan's dad said curtly, gesturing for everyone to take a seat. Ethan sat between his parents, feeling their protective presence on either side of him. Ms. Harper cleared her throat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I want to start by apologizing," she said, her voice strained but steady. "What I did yesterday was inappropriate and unprofessional. I let my frustration get the better of me, and I made a mistake. I'm sorry, Ethan." Ethan glanced at her, unsure how to feel. The apology sounded sincere, but it didn't erase the humiliation he'd felt. His mom leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "Ms. Harper, this isn't just about an apology. What you did was damaging, not just to Ethan, but to the trust every parent places in their child's teacher. We need to understand why you thought this was acceptable." Ms. Harper hesitated, her face flushed with shame. "I was trying to enforce the rules," she said finally. "Ethan was being disruptive, and I wanted to make an example of him. I see now that I went too far. I let my emotions cloud my judgment." Ethan's dad narrowed his eyes. Enforcing the rules doesn't mean humiliating a child in front of his peers. Do you understand the impact your actions have had on him, on us as a family? Ms. Harper nodded, her shoulders slumping. "I do," she said quietly. "I've been reflecting on this all night, and I know I have a lot to make up for." The tension in the room was palpable, and Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wanted to believe Ms. Harper's remorse, but a part of him couldn't shake the memory of her stern face and the laughter of his classmates. His mom spoke up again, her voice softening slightly. "We appreciate your apology, but this can't happen again. Not to Ethan, not to any child. What steps are you going to take to ensure this doesn't happen in the future?" Ms. Harper straightened, her expression determined. "I've already spoken with the school counselor, and I've agreed to attend a series of workshops on classroom management and emotional regulation. I'm also planning to address the entire class and apologize to Ethan in front of them. I want them to know that what I did was wrong." Ethan's dad nodded slowly, his expression still serious but less icy. "That's a start," he said. "But understand this, Ms. Harper, your actions will have consequences. As principal, I'll be formally documenting this incident, and any further behavior like this will result in immediate disciplinary action." Ms. Harper's face was pale, but she nodded. "I understand," she said, "and I'll do everything I can to make things right." The meeting ended soon after, but the weight of it lingered with Ethan as he went through his classes. True to her word, Ms. Harper called for a special meeting with his class at the end of the day. She stood at the front of the room, looking more vulnerable than Ethan had ever seen her. "I need to apologize to all of you," she began, her voice steady but emotional. "Yesterday, I made a terrible mistake. I treated Ethan in a way that was unfair and unkind, and I want you all to know that I'm deeply sorry. As your teacher, my job is to support and guide you, not to embarrass or hurt you. I failed in that yesterday, and I'm going to work hard to make sure it never happens again." The class was silent, and Ethan felt the eyes of his classmates on him once more. This time, though, the stares felt different, less judgmental, more understanding. As Ms. Harper finished speaking, she turned to Ethan, her expression earnest. "Ethan," she said, "I hope you can forgive me someday. I'll do everything I can to earn back your trust." Ethan hesitated, the words catching in his throat. He wasn't sure if he was ready to forgive her, but he nodded slightly, acknowledging her effort. As the bell rang and the students filed out, Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions. The hurt and embarrassment were still there, but so was a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things would get better. But as Ethan walked to his dad's office to head home, he couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't quite over yet. Something about the way Ms. Harper had looked at him, the way she'd seemed so desperate to make things right, it left him with questions he couldn't yet answer. As Ethan left his dad's office, the school hallways were eerily quiet, the usual after-school buzz replaced by a strange stillness. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was out of place. His dad, engrossed in paperwork, had told him to wait outside while he finished up, so Ethan wandered toward the library, hoping to pass the time. As he walked, a voice stopped him in his tracks. "Ethan, wait up." Turning, he saw Mia, one of his classmates, jogging toward him. She looked uneasy, her hands clutching the straps of her backpack tightly. "Hey, what's up?" Ethan asked, puzzled. Mia glanced around nervously before speaking. "I don't think Ms. Harper told the whole truth in that meeting," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Mia hesitated, biting her lip. "I overheard her talking to someone in the staff room yesterday. She didn't sound sorry at all. She said something about how she had to put you in your place." Ethan's chest tightened. Why would she say that? She already apologized to everyone. It seemed real. Mia shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "I don't know. But I thought you should know. It just didn't sit right with me." Ethan's mind raced as Mia walked away, leaving him alone in the hallway. If what she said was true, then Ms. Harper's apology might have been nothing more than a performance. But why would she go to all that trouble if she didn't mean it? And why would she target him specifically? Later that evening, Ethan brought it up to his parents. He explained what Mia had told him, watching as their expressions shifted from concern to anger. His mom was the first to speak, her voice sharp with frustration. "If that's true, then she's not just unprofessional. She's manipulative. We need to dig deeper into this." Ethan's dad nodded, his face set in a grim line. "I'll look into it first thing tomorrow. If there's any truth to this, it's bigger than just one incident. It's a question of whether she's fit to teach at all." The next day at school, Ethan felt a strange energy in the air, as if everyone was holding their breath. When he arrived at his first class, Ms. Harper wasn't there. Instead, a substitute teacher stood awkwardly at the front of the room, flipping through a lesson plan. "Where's Ms. Harper?" someone whispered, but no one had an answer. Ethan couldn't focus all morning. By lunchtime, the rumors were swirling. Some kids said Ms. Harper had been fired. Others claimed she'd quit. A few even suggested she had a nervous breakdown. But no one seemed to know the truth. It wasn't until after school that Ethan finally got a clue. As he waited for his dad outside the office, he overheard fragments of a tense conversation coming from inside. "Found something in her personnel file. Not the first time. Why wasn't this flagged earlier? Needs to be handled carefully. We don't want a lawsuit." Ethan's stomach churned. Whatever was going on, it was bigger than he imagined. When his dad finally came out of the office, his face was pale, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a heavy weariness. "Ethan, we need to talk," he said, guiding him into the car. The drive home was silent, the air thick with unspoken words. When they finally pulled into the driveway, Ethan's dad turned to him, his expression somber. "There's more to Ms. Harper's story than we realized," he said. Ethan leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What do you mean?" His dad hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I can't share all the details. It's a personnel matter. But let's just say this isn't the first time Ms. Harper has had issues with her students. There are patterns in her behavior, things that should have been addressed a long time ago. And somehow, they weren't." Ethan's mind reeled. "So she's done this to other kids?" His dad nodded grimly. "It seems that way. And now we're trying to figure out why it was allowed to go on for so long. But I want you to know we're taking it seriously. She won't be coming back to this school." A strange mix of emotions washed over Ethan, relief that she wouldn't hurt anyone else, but also a lingering unease. If Ms. Harper had been targeting students for years, how had no one noticed? Or worse, had people noticed and just looked the other way? The next day, the principal's office was buzzing with activity. Ethan overheard staff talking in hushed tones, their faces tight with worry. By the end of the week, The school board had launched an investigation, and parents were starting to demand answers. But for Ethan, the mystery still felt personal. Why had Ms. Harper singled him out? Was it just a coincidence, or was there something more to it? As he walked home that afternoon, his thoughts were interrupted by a voice behind him. "Ethan, wait." He turned to see Mia again, her expression more serious than before. "I think I know why Miss Harper targeted you," she said. Ethan froze, his heart racing. "Why?" Mia glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "It's about your dad," she said quietly. "I overheard her again, talking to another teacher. She said something about how she didn't like the way your dad runs the school. She called him power-hungry." Ethan stared at her, stunned. "What does that have to do with me?" Mia shrugged, her eyes wide with worry. "Maybe she was trying to make a point. I don't know, but it seemed personal." Ethan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. If Mia was right, then Ms. Harper's actions weren't just about enforcing rules or even singling out a student. They were about undermining his dad, using him to send a message. The thought made his skin crawl. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his family. And it wasn't over yet. Ethan spent the weekend thinking about what Mia had said. The idea that Ms. Harper had used him to undermine his dad gnawed at him, filling him with a mix of anger and disbelief. His dad had dedicated his life to the school, always putting students first. The thought that someone would target him in such a sneaky, underhanded way made Ethan's blood boil. But it also left him with a nagging question: why now? When Monday rolled around, the school felt different. The halls were alive with whispered conversations. Everyone knew about the investigation, and even though Ms. Harper was gone, her shadow loomed over the place. Ethan walked into the principal's office after school, ready to check in with his dad. "Ethan, we need to talk," his dad said, motioning for him to sit. His tone was heavy, but his eyes carried a spark of determination. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, bracing himself. "We've uncovered more about Ms. Harper's behavior," his dad began. "It turns out she had conflicts with several staff members before this. She felt like her ideas were ignored and blamed me for blocking her career progress. Apparently, she thought if she could discredit me, she might have a chance at taking my position." Ethan stared, his mouth slightly open. "She was trying to get you fired." His dad nodded. "It seemed so. And using you as part of her plan was a way to stir up enough controversy to make it happen. She underestimated how closely people were watching." Ethan's stomach churned. It all made sense now. Why she'd been so quick to humiliate him, why her apology felt rehearsed, why she targeted his dad in those conversations Mia overheard. "Is she going to face consequences?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with frustration. His dad sighed. "The investigation uncovered enough evidence to terminate her employment, but there's more. We found out she's been reporting false incidents about students to create chaos. It's worse than we thought." As they talked, a knock at the office door interrupted them. Ethan's mom stepped in, holding a folder. She gave Ethan a reassuring smile before turning to his dad. "You're going to want to see this," she said, placing the folder on the desk. Inside were several pages of documents, including emails Ms. Harper had sent to colleagues. Ethan's dad scanned them, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. "These emails show she was trying to rally other staff members against me," he said, his voice sharp. "She was actively trying to create division in the school." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about one incident. It was a calculated effort to ruin his dad's career. But just when they thought they'd uncovered everything, another twist emerged. Ethan's dad received a phone call that evening from a former teacher who used to work at the school. The teacher revealed that Ms. Harper had been transferred multiple times before landing here, each move preceded by similar controversies. She'd left a trail of fractured relationships and unresolved conflicts, but no one had connected the dots until now. By the next morning, the school board had enough evidence to file an official complaint against Ms. Harper, ensuring she wouldn't be able to work in education again. But just as Ethan's family began to feel a sense of relief, an unexpected twist threw them off balance. That afternoon, Ethan found an envelope in his locker with no name or return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten message. The truth always comes out, but not everyone's prepared for it. Ethan showed the note to his dad, who immediately reported it to the school board. While they couldn't trace where it came from, it left everyone uneasy. Was it a final attempt by Ms. Harper to intimidate them, or was someone else involved in her schemes? The mystery of the note lingered, but one thing was clear. Ms. Harper's actions had been exposed, and she wouldn't be able to harm anyone else. Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, relief, and a newfound respect for the strength of his family. As the days passed, the school slowly returned to normal. Ethan's dad worked hard to rebuild trust among the staff and students, determined to turn the ordeal into a lesson about standing up for what's right. Ethan, meanwhile, felt a deeper connection to his dad, proud of the way he handled everything with integrity and grace. But the note in the locker remained an unsolved puzzle. Though it seemed like the story was over, there was a lingering sense that another chapter might still unfold, leaving the door open for new revelations yet to come. Ethan couldn't shake the note from his mind. Its cryptic message kept him up at night, making him question if there were still pieces of the puzzle missing. His dad reassured him that they'd done everything they could, and the investigation had revealed the full extent of Miss Harper's misconduct. Yet the sense of lingering mystery hung over them like a cloud. Over the next few weeks, life began to settle into a new normal. Ethan returned to his classes, his friendships strengthened by the trust and support he'd found in his peers during the ordeal. Mia often checked in with him, jokingly asking if he'd uncovered any secret conspiracies lately. It was her way of lightening the mood, but it also reminded Ethan of how much he'd come to value her friendship. The school board officially closed its case on Miss Harper, and the faculty began to focus on healing the fractures she'd caused. Ethan's dad hosted several staff meetings aimed at fostering collaboration and rebuilding trust. Teachers who had once been wary of each other started working together, united by their shared commitment to the students. Ethan watched his dad during one of these meetings, noticing the way he spoke with conviction and kindness. It was clear that his dad wasn't just a principal. He was a leader who genuinely cared about the people around him. For the first time, Ethan understood the weight his dad carried every day, the constant balancing act of making decisions that impacted so many lives. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Ethan decided to bring up something that had been bothering him. "Dad, do you think the note was from Miss Harper? Or could it be someone else?" His dad put down his fork and thought for a moment. "It's hard to say, Ethan. We can't know for sure, and sometimes chasing every little detail can keep us stuck in the past. What matters is that we handled the situation the best way we could." Ethan nodded, but a part of him still wanted closure. The note felt like a loose end in an otherwise resolved story, a thread that refused to be tied up neatly. A few days later, the mystery took an unexpected turn. Ethan was walking through the library after school when he noticed an older teacher, Mr. Callahan, sitting alone at a table, flipping through a thick book. Mr. Callahan was known for being quiet and reserved, a man who seemed to fade into the background. But something about the way he glanced at Ethan made him stop. "Mr. Callahan," Ethan said, approaching cautiously. The teacher looked up and smiled faintly. "Ethan, how are you holding up?" "I'm okay," Ethan replied, hesitating. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." Ethan sat down across from him. "Did you know anything about Miss Harper's plans? Before everything happened, I mean." Mr. Callahan sighed deeply, closing the book in front of him. "Ethan, I've worked here for a long time, and I've seen people come and go. Ms. Harper, she wasn't the first person to let ambition cloud her judgment. But I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. I knew she was unhappy, that she felt overlooked, but I never thought she'd go to such lengths." Ethan studied his expression, sensing a mix of regret and relief. "Do you think the note was from her?" Mr. Callahan shook his head. No, I think whoever sent it wanted to remind you, and your father, that the truth has a way of surfacing. Maybe it was someone who believed in what your dad stands for, someone who wanted you to know you're not alone. Ethan wasn't entirely satisfied with the answer, but it gave him a sense of closure he hadn't expected. He thanked Mr. Callahan and left the library, feeling lighter somehow. As the weeks turned into months, the incident with Miss Harper became a distant memory for most people. The school thrived under Ethan's dad's leadership, and the community grew stronger. Ethan focused on his studies, finding new ways to channel his energy and curiosity. He joined the debate team, where his knack for speaking up and thinking critically earned him the respect of his teammates. One afternoon during a debate tournament, Ethan's dad surprised him by showing up in the audience. After the event, he pulled Ethan aside and said, "I'm proud of you, son. You've handled everything this year with so much courage." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. "Thanks, Dad. I think I've learned a lot from you." Their bond had grown stronger through the challenges they'd faced, and Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that while the past couldn't be changed, it could be a foundation for building something better. One evening, as Ethan was cleaning out his locker at the end of the school year, he found the note again, tucked in the back of a folder. He read it one more time, letting the words sink in. The truth always comes out, but not everyone's prepared for it. He folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. It was a reminder of everything he'd been through, a symbol of the resilience he'd discovered within himself. As he walked out of the school that day, the sun setting in the distance, Ethan felt a sense of peace. The story wasn't just about Miss Harper or the note. It was about the strength of his family, the power of standing up for what's right, and the connections that held them all together. Ethan glanced back at the school one last time, a small smile playing on his lips. The truth had come out, and while it hadn't been easy, it had led to something far greater than he ever could have imagined.